It was 3:14 a.m. when Dr. Alice Monroe saw the red and blue flash behind her in the rearview mirror. Her Tesla Model S coasted to a silent stop on a lonely, fog-slicked stretch of I-95, somewhere between Baltimore and D.C. She'd driven that road 100 times before, but never had it felt so hostile, so loaded with unseen danger. The fog hung low like smoke, swallowing the highway lights and muting the world to a breathless hush. The only sounds were the faint rumble of distant freight trucks and the sudden, jarring crunch of boots on gravel as the officers approached. Inside the car, Alice's heartbeat drummed in her ears. Her fingers tightened instinctively around the steering wheel, not in panic, but in preparation. Her father had taught her how to survive this exact moment. Hands high, eyes forward, voice low. Don't reach, don't flinch, don't give them a reason. She followed the drill to the letter. A harsh beam of light tore through the cabin, slicing across her face, reflecting off her glasses, settling on her ID badge still clipped to her blazer. She didn't blink, didn't look to the side. The flashlight moved like a weapon, slow and invasive, as if trying to provoke rather than illuminate. Another set of footsteps emerged, and then a voice from the passenger side. This one was colder, sharper, calculated. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" The figure outside loomed larger, one hand casually resting near his sidearm, the other holding a flashlight he hadn't turned on. His silhouette was unreadable, but Alice could feel the tension rolling off him like static. "Home," she said steadily. "I'm an attorney. I've just left the courthouse." The officer chuckled, low and humorless. "Which court's open at 3 a.m.? The implication hung heavy. She knew that tone, knew that smirk. It wasn't a question. It was bait, a challenge. She didn't respond. Silence in moments like this was safer than honesty. A sudden curt order followed. "Step out of the vehicle." Alice unbuckled slowly, her movements deliberate, rehearsed. She opened the door with her left hand, keeping the right visible. She stepped out, heels clicking on the asphalt, the cool air immediately biting at her skin. Then came the search. It wasn't of the car, it was of her. They took her bag, dumped it on the hood. Her laptop was powered on and rifled through without gloves, her bar card held up like it was fake ID. "You sure this isn't stolen?" one of them sneered. Her briefcase, full of privileged legal documents, was opened and flipped through like a pack of playing cards. She remained calm, breathing shallow, shoulders back. When she quietly reached for her phone, to document, not protest, the second officer slapped it from her hand. It clattered across the pavement, screen cracking. "Hands where I can see them." The voice was no longer calm, it was sharp, demanding, unquestionable. Before she could ask why, before she could even form a sentence, she felt the cold, unforgiving bite of steel circle her wrists. The cuffs locked with a heavy, echoing snap that seemed to silence the night. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't resisted. She hadn't broken the law. She was a black woman, alone on a highway, holding power they didn't think she should have. And that to them was enough. Dr. Alice Monroe wasn't just another name in legal circles. She was a force. Her rise from a single-parent home in Oakland to the marble steps of federal courthouses across the country was the stuff of documentaries. Harvard Law, clerkships with federal judges, and a cabinet of awards lined her office walls. But her most powerful victories didn't hang in frames. They lived in the eyes of the families she'd defended. A decorated civil rights attorney and the mother of 2 young boys, Alice had built her career and her life on one principle: accountability, especially when it came to law enforcement. Just 3 days earlier, she'd secured a landmark ruling in a Philadelphia courtroom. The target of her case? A police precinct known for brutality, silence, and missing footage. Her team's evidence was airtight: recordings, whistleblower testimony, forensic audits. The result? A sweeping order mandating independent oversight, mandatory body cam audits, and the nation's first state-enforced racial bias intervention program. Civil rights groups hailed her as a modern-day titan. Headlines called it a watershed moment. Social media exploded. And then came the backlash. Anonymous threats began dripping into her inbox within hours. untraceable emails with words like traitor, you people, and watch your back. Her office in D.C. received a package with no return address marked with a thick red X. The bomb squad was called. It turned out to be empty, except for a single sheet of paper with the words, "We know where your sons go to school." Security footage at her building showed a man in a hoodie loitering near her parking spot for 3 consecutive nights. The next day, her sons, aged 12 and 9, were pulled out of class for a routine school safety interview. Neither Alice nor their father had been informed. The school counselor looked shaken. Still, Alice pressed on. That night, she stayed late in court, representing a 17-year-old Latina girl brutally assaulted during a traffic stop in Virginia. The girl's injuries were severe, her voice barely audible from trauma. Alice sat beside her, holding her hand during the cross-examination. When the session finally ended just after midnight, Alice declined the offer of a security escort. She didn't want to seem afraid. She didn't want to give anyone that satisfaction. The courthouse emptied slowly. The sky outside was dark and heavy, threatening rain. Her drive home was quiet. Her phone buzzed with unanswered messages. The road was empty, until the lights appeared behind her, red, blue, and everything changed. After her arrest, Alice was not taken to the nearest precinct. Instead, they drove her nearly an hour into the countryside, through winding back roads and long-forgotten industrial stretches, finally arriving at a squat brick building that looked more like an abandoned vocational school than a law enforcement facility. The sign outside was rusted. The lot was empty. There was no front desk, no badge scanner, no obvious security. It was a place designed to disappear, one that didn't show up on public maps or in official directories. The moment she stepped inside, her phone was taken. No explanation, no receipt, no acknowledgement. She asked to call her lawyer. They ignored her. She invoked her right to counsel. No one responded. They didn't read her Miranda rights. Still, Alice pressed on. That night, she stayed late in court, representing a 17-year-old Latina girl, brutally assaulted during a traffic stop in Virginia. The girl's injuries were severe, her voice barely audible from trauma. Alice sat beside her, holding her hand during the cross-examination. This way through from underneath. Fluorescent lights overhead flickered in irregular intervals, casting ghostly shadows that danced across the grimy walls. At the end of the hall, they pushed her into a holding room. No windows, no clock, no ventilation, just a single metal door with no handle on the inside. It clicked shut behind her with the finality of a tomb. The room had a single rusted bench bolted to the floor and a mirror so cracked it distorted her reflection into jagged shards of herself. A surveillance camera perched high in the corner, its red light dead. She wasn't sure if it worked or if someone was watching on the other side, but she acted like it did. That was the only leverage she had. Time stretched. Hours passed. No food, no water, no voices. Just the electric hum of the lights and the creeping sense that something was wrong on a level deeper than legality. Wrong in the structure of this place, in the way it erased her. It wasn't a detainment. It was a warning. Alice tried to keep her mind sharp. She counted the flickers in the ceiling light, tapped out the rhythm of her breath, recited court precedents under her breath just to stay grounded. But eventually, even that broke down. And then, the door creaked. Leather boots, a slow stride, Officer Blake. She recognized him instantly. His face had haunted witness testimonies and courtroom transcripts. Years ago, he was the lead patrol officer in a wrongful death case she had prosecuted. He'd lied under oath. She had proved it. Her relentless questioning had exposed him as a liability. He was suspended, quietly, disgraced, or so she thought. Now he stood in front of her, uniform crisp, eyes cold, reinstated, emboldened. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He dragged a metal chair across the floor, the screech of it echoing like a scream in the small room. He flipped it backward and sat like he was in a casual interrogation, one leg stretched out, hands resting casually on the backrest. "Funny seeing you here, counselor," he said, voice low and smooth, but sharp like broken glass. From under his arm, he dropped a manila folder onto the table. Thick, heavy. He let it sit there for a few seconds, just to let it breathe. Then he opened it. Slowly, deliberately. A magician with a cruel reveal. Inside, photographs, dozens of them. Crisp surveillance shots, not from media, not from public cameras. These were personal, stalked, taken up close. Her front door, her car parked outside her kid's school, her boys walking, laughing, unaware. A photo of her crossing the courthouse lobby, one of her at a diner talking to a friend, head slightly turned, eyes focused. Each one landed like a punch. "You've been busy," Blake said. "But so have we." Alice's body went rigid. Her throat dried, but she didn't flinch. He leaned in closer, so close she could smell the cologne, something generic, aggressive. "Maybe it's time to drop the crusade," he whispered, "before someone gets hurt." Her jaw clenched. She looked him in the eyes. "I want to speak to internal affairs," she said, her voice as cold as the cinder block walls around them. He laughed. A short, sharp thing. Not amused. Just cruel. Then he pushed himself up, palms flat on the table, leaning in so close his words fogged the surface. "Who do you think signed off on this room?" He stared at her for a beat too long. Then he turned, walked out, and slammed the door behind him. The flickering light above her buzzed louder. Alice sat still. The fear hadn't left, but now it had turned to fire. She wasn't just angry, she was ready. Alice was released hours later. No charges, no paperwork, not even an acknowledgement that she'd been detained. Just a clipboard to sign and a warning from a tired officer who didn't make eye contact. Be more careful. No apology. No explanation. As if she'd imagined the entire thing. By the time she got home, dawn was already beginning to peel over the skyline. Her phone, once returned, was vibrating nonstop. But the messages weren't what she expected. Not support, not outrage, confusion, concern, screenshots. By morning, her name was trending across multiple platforms. Not as a hero, as a problem. Anonymous accounts posted pixelated photos of her in cuffs, blurry video from the roadside, edited out of context. Headlines twisted by far-right bloggers screamed, "Woke lawyer exposed," "Ties to extremist activist network," "Civil rights attorney faked credentials." It was coordinated, precise. A digital takedown. Doctored images circulated. One showed her shaking hands with a known radical figure she had never met. Another pasted her face into the background of a protest that turned violent. Her credentials were called into question. Her Harvard diploma labeled a forgery. Even her bar association began receiving anonymous tips demanding an internal review. Sponsors of her nonprofit quietly withdrew support. Donors froze accounts. Upcoming speaking engagements were quietly canceled due to scheduling conflicts. And then the final blow came, not to her, but to her family. Her son, 12 years old, was walking home from school when a police cruiser pulled up alongside him. No sirens, no lights, just two officers stepping out, blocking his path. "We got a call," said someone matching your description was seen casing a store. He froze, like his mother had taught him. Stayed still. Spoke softly. They searched his backpack, his lunchbox, his school-issued Chromebook. They found nothing. Because there was nothing. They let him go. No apology. Just a warning to stay out of trouble. When Alice got the call from the school, her hands shook so hard she dropped the phone. He matched the description. 3 words that would haunt her forever. Not just as a mother, not just as a lawyer, but as a black woman in a country that didn't need a reason, just a profile. No charges, no justice, just trauma, and a fire that would only grow. Alice turned to digital forensic experts. She wanted confirmation, evidence to fight back with. But what they found went deeper than she could have imagined. Her laptop had been remotely accessed days before her arrest. Her work email had been cloned and spoofed, used to send bizarre messages to government contacts and colleagues, messages that made her seem paranoid or unstable. Her encrypted folders were broken into, files altered, drafts of legal briefs rewritten in ways that undermined her clients. Her phone, they discovered, had been cloned entirely. There were 2 Alices in the system, one real, one phantom. The fake had been sending texts, making calls, even geotagging photos at places she'd never been. One of those images had shown up in a smear article just 2 days earlier. Everything, the arrest, the social media campaign, the attack on her family, had been part of a coordinated strategy. She wasn't just being silenced, she was being erased. But Alice wasn't done. Fueled by rage, clarity, and the quiet fury of knowing she was right, she went on the offensive. She filed a sweeping civil suit, not just against the county sheriff's department, but also against the city, the police union, and 5 individual officers named directly in the cover-up. She named the department's IT liaison and an unknown third-party data contractor linked to DHS. She had names, timestamps, screenshots. She launched a civil rights media campaign titled Erase No More. The campaign focused on digital erasure of Black activists and professionals, how reputations were being sabotaged online to neutralize influence in the real world. The campaign garnered immediate support from tech whistleblowers, digital privacy watchdogs, and national justice organizations. And then came the leak. She released surveillance footage from inside the holding room. The grainy video showed Officer Blake, the folder, the threats, her calm defiance. The moment he said, "Who do you think signed off on this room?" the footage exploded across platforms, reposted, shared, dissected by journalists and influencers alike. Within 24 hours, it had 3 million views. By the third day, it crossed 10 million. Alice Monroe trended worldwide. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was a movement. Just 7 days after the footage leak, Alice Monroe stood before Congress. The Capitol dome loomed above her as she stepped through the marble halls, flanked by aides and civil rights attorneys. Her face bore the faint remnants of exhaustion, and her wrist still held a faint red indentation from the cuffs that had bound her. But there was no sign of fear, no hesitation. She wore a simple navy suit. Her natural curls were tied back, her expression composed. In her hand, she clutched a leather binder, not full of speeches, but receipts. The hearing room was standing room only. Lawmakers sat with folded arms or scribbling pens. Journalists lined the back wall, their cameras poised. Survivors of abuse filled the seats. Some watched with admiration, some with quiet hope, some with pain still fresh in their eyes. Alice raised her right hand, swore the oath, and took her seat. Then she began. Her opening statement was quiet, intentional. Every word was like a blade. "I stand before you not as a victim," she said, "but as evidence. Evidence of what happens when power fears the truth more than it fears wrongdoing." She laid it all out, chronologically, clinically. She walked the committee through every step of the ordeal, from the moment her ID was flagged without cause, to the fabricated messages from a cloned phone, to the threats issued behind closed doors. She named the officers, the department heads, the surveillance contractors, the tech firm subcontracted by Homeland Security that had replicated her digital identity. Her voice didn't shake, but others in the room did. Then she reached into her binder and pressed play on a small speaker. Static. Then the voice, "Officer Blake. Maybe it's time to drop the crusade before someone gets hurt." Then her own voice, calm, steady. "My name is Alice Monroe. I am a licensed civil rights attorney. I am being detained without charge." The room was silent but electric. The audio echoed through the congressional chamber like a stone thrown into still water. Some members of Congress fidgeted in their seats. Others bowed their heads. One congresswoman covered her mouth and closed her eyes. Alice looked them all in the eye. "This isn't just about me," she continued. "It's about every woman who has been handcuffed by silence, every child stopped because they matched the description, every voice dismissed because it came from the wrong zip code." She paused. Then, "They didn't just try to stop me, they tried to erase me, but I am still here, and I brought receipts." The gallery stood in a wave of applause, spontaneous, unstoppable. Survivors were first, then law students, then organizers, then lawmakers. The sound filled the chamber. The response was swift. 2 officers identified in the footage were suspended pending internal investigation. A senior DHS official resigned within 48 hours. The Inspector General's office launched a full-scale inquiry into digital surveillance practices and civil rights violations. But Alice didn't stay for the aftermath. She left the room the same way she came in, head high, spine straight, fire in her eyes. She hadn't just testified, she had changed the conversation. Alice returned to her work, but everything was different now. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a symbol, a survivor, a rallying point. Her presence in courtrooms no longer represented just one client. It represented every woman who had been silenced, every family who had been threatened, every life disrupted by the machinery of systemic abuse. She walked into hearings, flanked not just by legal teams, but by waves of support. Survivors she had helped, organizers who had fought beside her, students who had studied her testimony, and women, black women, who had once felt invisible in the places where decisions were made. She had become the proof that fighting back wasn't just possible, it was powerful. Within weeks, Alice launched the Monroe Initiative, a national legal defense and advocacy network with a singular mission to protect, represent, and empower black women and girls targeted by abuse of power. But it wasn't just a law firm, it was a fortress. Operating out of repurposed churches, university hubs, and sleek downtown offices donated by allies, the Monroe Initiative quickly became one of the most respected civil rights coalitions in the country. Its reach extended into rural counties and major cities alike. It offered more than legal support. It offered sanctuary, trauma counseling, digital defense teams, policy advisors, a hotline staffed 24/7 by multilingual advocates. They helped women fight back against workplace harassment, police profiling, digital surveillance, housing discrimination, and more. Every case was tracked. Every win celebrated. Former clients returned as volunteers. Law students applied in droves to intern. Journalists embedded to tell their stories. High-profile attorneys left firms to join full-time. Alice became a fixture on the national stage. She toured the country speaking at universities, women's shelters, community centers, tech summits, and civil rights conferences. She held roundtables with senators and town halls with single mothers. She worked with cybersecurity experts to push digital privacy reform and met with school districts to integrate Know Your Rights education into public curriculums. She sat with mothers in grief, with teenagers fresh from court, with girls who had never been believed until she walked in. And through it all, she repeated the same message. They tried to stop me, so I built a place they can't touch. And in that place, in the Monroe Initiative, millions didn't just find protection. They found their voice. Fade out.